into the home of newlyweds Jared and Lindsay Rowley. His explanation was that he hadn't broken in, he was being chased and he feared for his life, so he forced entry into the house to hide from his pursuers. What he left out was that the people chasing him were the police. Though, if it was female police officers chasing him, then the man's got a point. Jesse claimed that he had made a deal with the couple for them to hide him. In return, he said that he would offer them money, though it was never actually specified how much he would give them. And in Jesse's mind, this was a legally binding verbal contract. Both Jared and Lindsay were absolutely terrified of what Jesse might do, since he had a knife with him and they suspected that he might also have a gun. But they kept their cool, they fed him, and they even watched movies with him. Until Jesse, the guy that had just broken into someone's home and taken them hostage, essentially, fell asleep. The poor kidnapper and murder suspect was all tuckered out. The couple took this opportunity to escape, luckily with no harm done to them. Jesse had a surprise wake-up call when the police showed up to arrest him, though he didn't go easily and he ended up getting shot and was sent to hospital. Jared and Lindsay filed a $75,000 lawsuit against Jesse for intruding and causing emotional distress during the kidnap. Jesse, however, filed a countersuit, saying that he wanted $235,000 due to a breach of contract and to pay for his hospital bills after getting shot. So, not only had he broken into their house and kidnapped them, the kidnapper now wanted to sue his hostages for his own actions. His lawsuit failed. I'm sure you'll all be very shocked to hear. But not because a judge just instantly threw it out because of how stupid it was, but because the court actually got Jesse on a technicality. He didn't specify the exact amount of money that he would pay them in the deal, which is required for something to be considered a verbal contract. And even if it was a verbal contract, it was made under duress because he had a fucking knife. Jesse was convicted in May of 2010 and he was handed a sentence of 10 years and 11 months for 4 felonies, 2 of which were kidnapping. He also was being charged with murder after being transferred to a Colorado jail, but it seems that case is still ongoing. This next case involves some terrified and confused employees of a bank in 1995. Because a guy armed with a pistol came in to rob the bank. The robber's name was Klaus Schmidt, and during the theft, the staff started to notice that he was acting very strangely. When the staff asked him if he wanted the money to be bagged, he responded by shouting, "You're damn right it's a real gun," which everyone found a little bit confusing. Thinking that this was a sign that he was psychotic and fearing for their lives, the staff did exactly as he asked. Until they noticed that Schmidt wasn't responding properly to any audio cues. They then realised that this man robbing their bank was completely deaf. The employees then realised that even though the bank didn't have a silent alarm, they could trigger it anyway. Because how the fuck was he gonna know? So they triggered the alarm, which was piercingly loud and alerted the entire local area that the bank was being robbed. But hilariously, Schmidt had no idea. He just continued shouting threats like, "I am a trained killer, I am a trained killer," while not having any idea that the cops were now on their way. The police showed up, and finding a negotiator who knew sign language would have been a huge bother. But luckily, they didn't need one. Since the guy was completely deaf, the cops literally just snuck up on him and jumped him because he couldn't hear them coming. He was taken to the ground and was immediately arrested. Schmidt then filed a lawsuit against the bank and the police. for ableism, claiming that they took advantage of him being deaf to thwart his plans.
Alright, ready to work.
You were robbing a fucking bank, mate.
Off I go then.
The case was
Righto.
thrown out.
More
Next
work,
up,
job
Emil
done.
Rattleband, age 69, wanted to legally change his birth date by 20 years to avoid discrimination due to his age. His doctor had told him that his biological age was around 42 years. Emil said that we live in a time where you can change your name and change your gender. Why can't I decide my own age? Though, when he took it to court, they disagreed since there was no legal basis to make such a change like that, and also many laws are based on someone's age. He was then told that he has the freedom to feel 20 years younger and to act that way if he so chooses. But his age would legally remain the same. I think that's a very sensible position. For many things. You would think that that would be over and done with, but after comparing himself to transgender people, he really kicked the hornet's nest. He was invited on shows to apparently talk about his case regarding his age, but all of that was really just a smokescreen to get him into an argument with transgender activists. I mean, you don't really need a smokescreen for that. That shit is literally the easiest thing in the world. Simply exist and be white and straight. That's all you need. Want to make a trans person angry? Exist. In another case, a federal jury awarded Jeffrey Klein and Brett Birdwell millions of dollars for being injured while trespassing. Klein had suffered burns that covered 75% of his body, and Birdwell 12% of his body. In 2002, the two guys were skateboarding and decided to get into some shenanigans by trespassing on a rail track and climbing on top of a parked boxcar so that they could get a nice view of the city. Seems like the kind of thing that teenagers would get up to, and if the events that followed hadn't happened, they may have looked back on this as a nice, fond, wholesome memory. But, and I am sure every single one of you figured out exactly where this story was going, Klein touched an exposed wire, and this wire sent 12,500 volts of electricity through his body, which actually set his clothes on fire. His friend Birdwell then suffered burns himself trying to put the flames out on his friend's body. During the trial in 2006, it was deemed that the company that owned the track, Amtrak and Norfolk Southern Corporation, hadn't put up enough signs warning of the danger, and the ages of the teens were taken into account since they were both 17 at the time. The money awarded in the case was for medical costs, pain and suffering, and loss of life pleasure. The jury had awarded Klein and Birdwell $4,375,000 in punitive damages against Amtrak and $1,875,000 in punitive damages against Norfolk Southern, which is an amazing payday if you didn't have to live the rest of your life as the burned man. However, let's acknowledge that both of these teenagers were absolute fucking morons. We can't expect signs to do all the work. Now for a case that all of you have heard of. Stella Liebeck ordered a coffee from a McDonald's drive-thru window and accidentally spilled it onto her lap while her grandson was driving. This might seem like something that unfortunately happens to everyone, except in this case, the coffee was overheated and meant that Stella had to be rushed to hospital. She spent 8 days in there to undergo skin grafting. Yes, it was that bad. You can find actual pictures of it online, but I can't show them here, and to be honest, I don't think I want to. That day, Stella had worn cotton trousers, which had absorbed the scalding hot coffee and basically melted them to her skin, which led to her receiving third-degree burns on around 6% of her body. She lost a fair amount of weight while she was in the hospital, and she needed help for a few weeks from her daughter, and she was now permanently disfigured, and she was also disabled for 2 years after the incident. Initially, Stella asked McDonald's for $20,000 to cover her medical bill and also her daughter's lost income from the time she had to take off work to take care of her mother, which you would think would be perfectly reasonable. But, as you would expect from any partner's corporation, they refused her settlement and offered her a measly $800. So, the only option then was to take them to court. Stella's lawyer explained to the court that the coffee was far too hot at 190 degrees Fahrenheit or 88 degrees Celsius. So instead of the $800 that they offered her or the $20,000 that Stella was looking for, the court awarded her $160,000 in compensating damages to cover her medical expenses and $2.7 million in punitive damages, the equivalent of 2 whole days of McDonald's coffee sales, which I'm sure left a very sour taste in their mouth, almost as bad as their coffee. Who the fuck is still buying coffee from McDonald's? But it seems that there was a little bit of fuckery in regards to this case, as Stella is very often derided and mocked for being so stupid because, of course, coffee is hot. And this particular case is very often used as an example of America's crazy "I'm gonna sue you" culture. And the entire thing paints Stella as a stupid, litigious person who gained a lot of money from her own stupidity. However, the reason that most people think that about this particular case is because allegedly, McDonald's did a little bit of PR and media wizardry to make it seem that way so that Stella would be demonized and painted as an idiot to make McDonald's look like they weren't at fault, when they did make the coffee way too hot. In 2006, a man from Portland, Oregon named Alan Heckard tried to sue Michael Jordan as well as Nike co-founder Phil Knight for promoting Michael Jordan's face. The combined amount that he was looking to get in the trial was $832 million for personal injury, emotional pain, mental distress, and suffering. Now, you're probably thinking that Michael Jordan must have done something pretty serious to this poor man. Well, he seemed to think so. The reason for the lawsuit was because Alan Heckard looked an awful lot like Michael Jordan, and he became really sick of people mistaking him for Michael Jordan for the past 15 years, including his crazed fans. Apparently, people kept asking him if he was that guy from Space Jam. Alan said that he just wanted to be seen as himself, just like Jordan is seen as Jordan. They did have a resemblance since the guy shaved his head and had an earring just like Jordan, which probably wasn't helping his case. But a large flaw was that he was 6 whole inches shorter than the basketball player. He couldn't even get a lawyer to represent him, which says a lot, but Alan went ahead anyway, making the biggest legal mistake that anyone could make by representing himself. The case, as anyone would guess, went absolutely nowhere, and Alan eventually dropped the lawsuit after possibly coming to his senses, or he was just tired of everyone laughing at him for how ridiculous his case was. In 2009, a 20-year-old woman named Chelsea Hess decided to meet with some friends at Jock's Sports Grill in Bluffton, South Carolina, and despite not being 21, which is the legal drinking age in the state, she was served alcohol anyway. After hanging out, she left drunk at 1 a.m. and she made the big brain decision to drive home. And I'm sure that you will all be very shocked to hear that she lost control of her car, rolling it off the road. And of course, she wasn't wearing a seatbelt, so the impact of the crash meant that she was thrown out of the car and launched 6 feet. She sustained serious injuries that left her a paraplegic. But Chelsea refused to take any of the blame for her bad choices and instead decided that it was the fault of the sports grill because, after all, they had forced all of those drinks down her throat and then explicitly told her to drive home drunk without a seatbelt. Not only did she want to sue the sports grill, she also wanted to sue the South Carolina Department of Transportation for allegedly not properly maintaining the road shoulder that she had crashed on. The case ultimately didn't go anywhere. Now, another one that you've all probably heard of. Jan Feng from China saw his newborn daughter and he immediately thought to himself, wow, that's a fucking ugly baby. and he noticed that the baby didn't look like him or even his wife, so he suspected that his wife must have been cheating on him. Turns out the reason that the baby didn't look like them is because the wife admitted to having a lot of plastic surgery before they met, which is very common in Asian countries. However, Jan sued his wife on the grounds of entering into a marriage under false pretenses, saying that she had misled him with her looks. And he won the case. In fact, she was ordered to pay him over $120,000. In the West, this might have been a bit of a cell phone since they were married and their finances would have probably been combined. There is some debate over whether or not this story is fully real, since getting accurate news out of China is pretty difficult, and it may or may not have happened, or it did kind of happen and the story has just been greatly invented. A lesser known story is that of a 27-year-old man from Michigan who had a fender bender with a guy in a pickup truck. He took the driver to court not because of the accident or for any damages to his vehicle, but because he said that the man that had rear-ended him had turned him gay. I mean, maybe it works like that, I've absolutely no idea, but he claimed that after the accident, he just couldn't stop going to gay bars. And I think he was trying to blame a possible head injury from the accident for his new behaviour. You would think that he would have just been laughed out of the courtroom, but by some miracle, he was awarded $200,000. I mean, if you become gay after a guy rear-ends you, then I think it's because you like it. Robert Lee Brock, while serving a 23-year sentence, sued himself for $5 million because he violated his own religious beliefs, became a drunk, and got himself arrested. This sounds extremely stupid, but it was an attempted finesse. Turns out Brock was actually trying to be clever since he had no money when he was in jail. But he was a ward of the state, meaning that if he won against himself, the state would have to be the ones to pay the money out to himself. Clearly, he's an absolute mastermind, but the case was obviously seen as a mockery and was quickly dismissed. Another theory was that he was trying to make himself look kooky-boo and absolutely nuts so that he would be transferred to a psychiatric hospital, but he never got his transfer or his money. In fact, prison inmates very often start ridiculous lawsuits. Convicted murderer and rapist Lawrence Whitaker tried to sue the prison as he was absolutely distraught after being served a soggy sandwich and a broken cookie at San Quentin prison. In New York, at Sing Sing prison, inmate Joseph Gonzalez said that he had suffered insomnia and migraines after receiving Kenneth Parker of Nevada State Prison was unhappy that instead of receiving 2 jars of chunky peanut butter, one of them was smooth. These kinds of stupid lawsuits happen so often from prison inmates that the government actually plans to punish them if their case is deemed frivolous. Of course, they can't legally, from a whole human rights standpoint, actually prevent them from filing a lawsuit, but average citizens are usually financially sanctioned if they file dumb cases. For prisoners, that doesn't really affect them since they're all poor anyway. So, if the lawsuit is some frivolous bullshit, the government plans to just add more time onto the prisoner's sentence. In 2015, Jennifer Connell attended the birthday party of her 8-year-old nephew, Sean Tuff. On arrival, her nephew jumped off his bike and ran towards her, which ended in a rugby tackle. As they both fell to the ground, Jennifer landed on her arm and broke. After a few years of trying to get money from her insurance company to pay her medical bills, they offered her $1, which honestly is kind of a joke. But not as funny as her next move. She would sue her now 12-year-old nephew for $127,000. That's a lot of paper rounds. In court, she said that her injuries were caused by carelessness and negligence, also adding that a reasonable 8-year-old should have known better. A reasonable 8-year-old. A lot of you probably have kids. Some of you probably have an 8-year-old right now.
Yes, me lord.
Look me in the eye and tell me that any 8-year-old is fucking reasonable. The court, of course, deemed Sean innocent and she lost the case. When questioned about it later, she claimed that it was just an insurance formality because they wouldn't pay her. Which, to me, kind of seems like an attempt at covering up her. Some cases are a bit too short, but still deserve a mention. A man sued the previous owner of his house because he claimed it was haunted. A surfer sued another surfer for stealing his wave, claiming it was for his pain and suffering. A man sued a doctor for giving him a hairy hand because the skin graft was taken from his chest. A guy sued Red Bull because it didn't actually give him wings. There are just so many wild court stories, and many are just rumours or urban legends, but occasionally you hear a story that sounds so ridiculous that it just has to be fake, and then you find out that it's completely real.
Job's done. I can't build that.
God bless America.
Our forces are under attack.
There are few things as pervasive throughout human history as war. Ever since Abel got more scoped by the first rock, we as a species have been at each other's throats over gods, honour, glory, adventure, land, resources, slaves, spices, booty, the other kind of booty that we don't talk about, and most importantly, Swedish power mechanisms. Being the oldest racket there is, it should come as no surprise that the motivations for going to war are many. Some people go to war to gain wealth, territory, and bragging rights in the Senate. Some fight to protect their land and way of life from foreign invaders. Others want to trade small pots of gold and fight the TGF. Many see it as a great excuse to play with their fancy mechanised death machines, and generally, war is just a great way to give your autistic grandchildren a hobby. This video, however, is not about it. While some conflicts are more justified than others, body, there are some wars that are either completely bizarre or just outright stupid. Rest assured there are plenty of exciting heroes on the list, but today I thought we could get a little bit silly. So here are some of the dumbest conflicts I have ever seen. But before we get into the video, today's sponsor is me. In December, I'm doing some comedy shows in London. On December the 12th, I'm doing a small set at Legendary Comedy Unleashed, and then I'm doing another 2 longer shows on the 15th and 16th of December with Leo Kerse and a few others. People always love these shows, they're always having a great time, so I'll put the links to buy tickets to those down below. Also, I don't promote my own stuff anywhere near as much as I should, so a lot of you might not know that I actually have a second channel where I mostly cover news and world events relating to freedom of speech, government overreach, or things that I just find. I also post there mostly about things, so there's a lot of content. I also have a merch store, a Patreon, a subscribe star, and you will find the links to all of them below. And the reason I'm shouting out the money stuff is that in the future I plan on making a few documentaries. And I don't mean me just sitting in this room talking like I usually do on the main channel. I mean actually going out and meeting people, interviewing people, filming on location, all that stuff. But that takes a lot of time and money because while I'm out there doing all of that, I'm not in here doing the work. Also, I have plans to do other stuff in the future. I'm not ready to talk about that yet, but maybe one day. So yes, go and buy tickets to my events and come and get drunk. And go and subscribe to my second channel. New sponsor. Show me some love. The first conflict that we're going to talk about today is what I like to call the Roman Bum War, or the Jew Bum War. No one else actually calls it that, but I do because it is a pretty good description of what actually happened, plus it's pretty fucking funny. However, before we get there, we do need to have a little bit of a history lesson. After Pompey the Great conquered the Kingdom of Judea and the Judo-Basic Republic, it was made what was called a client kingdom rather than a province. A lot of areas in the east were much more civilized than the likes of Gaul, Britain and Germany, so instead of building a local government from the ground up by establishing garrisons and appointing governors, the Romans just let the king continue to be king and do whatever the hell he wanted, as long as he paid his tax. Or else. So, apart from the odd detachment of soldiers, the only Roman that these client kingdoms usually saw was the taxman. Except, as the Roman Republic gave way to the Roman Empire, Judea was turned into a province. Client kings were replaced by Roman procurators, and the entire place became a fucking massive powder keg. And while this powder keg wouldn't blow up until the outbreak of the First Jewish War, there were a lot of Romans who liked to play with matches while sitting on top of it. The Romans' hold over their conquered peoples wasn't really helped by the fact that they didn't take provincial customs very seriously. While the client kingdoms were mostly left alone as long as they paid tribute, the Romans sought to put every barbarian they could find into a skull. Except for Egypt, because their drip was off. The Egyptian aesthetics were so cool that they actually made an eye dubs out of one of Rome's most celebrated gems. But I digress. And despite their insistence on humanifying everything that moves, the Romans were surprisingly really good about religious diversity. After all, it wasn't just gayness that they took from the Greeks. All they asked in return was that you worshipped the emperor in addition to your other gods. However, being monotheists, Jews absolutely refused to do this. This led to a very contentious relationship, pagans versus one true god. There were also many cultural differences that really pissed off the Jews in equal measure, but the religious angle was especially hard to reconcile, especially considering what the Torah says should be done about people who don't believe. But apart from the odd religious zealot faction that would cause trouble in between bouts of infighting and the occasional Roman dipshit that tried to put a statue of the emperor in Jewish temples or raise their taxes to Babel-esque levels after an even bigger dipshit let Rome burn down while fiddling his lyre with one hand and his eunuch boy with the other, the Jews weren't really kicking up too much. Yeah, the Romans and Jews absolutely fucking hated each other and everything was about absolute shit. So the Great Fire of Rome, Nero's meltdown and the emperors coming in possession, but for now, things were relatively about as stable as Judea. While they grumbled about how much they hated the Romans taking all their money, the Jews did render unto Caesar what was Caesar, because you've all seen Monty Python, the Romans had done a lot for them. And the Jews couldn't deny that the Romans had massively upgraded their infrastructure and made the roads and sea routes safe for all of the pilgrims heading over for Passover. And while they refused to put statues on their temples, they did make the required sacrifices to the emperor, justifying it by saying that an empire like Rome could never have come into being without the help of God. So, I suppose the Jews treated the emperor kind of like how the inquisitors treat the omniscient. They don't like him, but he does give them all of their stuff. So, who needs principles when there's profit? The Roman bum war was only mentioned very briefly and somewhat in passing by the Jewish historian Josephus as a footnote in the much larger First Jewish War, which he called Clovis, one of the Jews that actually fought against the Romans, and later as one of the generals, and later as emperors Vespasian and Titus's most important advisor. And good fucking lord Vespasian and Titus crushed that down. Despite having written our best source on what actually happened, Josephus had certainly highly embellished the story in many ways. You see, the account was sort of written as both Roman and Jewish propaganda, because he kind of switched sides, but not. But the guy's involvement in the Jewish war was complicated enough that it warrants an entire video in and of itself, and that will. But all of that is a decade after the fact of what we're discussing. But I just needed you to know how tense the relationship was between the Romans and the Jews, so that you can understand why something as petty as what we're about to talk about resulted in the deaths of thousands. Sometime between 48 and 52, the Roman procurator, surprisingly aptly named Ventidius Cumanus, man's name was literally Cum Anus, was one of the aforementioned dipshits who really enjoyed harassing people. You see, while he was in charge, he wasn't very good at actually keeping order. He was pretty much just waiting for any chance at all to make this powder keg go off. Therefore, he didn't really keep his men under a particularly tight leash when they were in Judea, which led to a number of, let's just call them, gamer moments towards the Jews. One of these being the Bucking Wall. In Jerusalem, there was a huge gathering of pilgrims at the temple for Passover, so many that even Roman auxiliaries were called in to watch over the temple's cloisters just to keep order in case anything happened. They were there to act more like bouncers than anything. But from this vantage point, we see all this. Then, one soldier took his chance. He turned around, bent over, lifted up his skirt, and showed his arse to the Jews. He moonied the Jews. Despite the fact that Passover is supposed to start with a full moon, the Jews were not particularly happy about this, to put it mildly. And as if being mooned during one of the holiest days of the year wasn't insulting enough, according to Josephus, the Roman soldier also, and I quote, spake such words as you might expect upon such posture. Which means that the Roman soldier was making farting noises at the Jews. He would... the Roman soldier was mooning the Jews and making farting noises. I mean, it turns out that the Romans are such great innovators in every field that they were even the first to attempt. Let's just move on. The Jews had just borne witness to history in the making. because this was the first ever historically recorded mooning. But, as funny as this is, the Jews did not see the incident as just a good bit of crap. So many of them furiously rushed to Communus to get him to do something about his soldier making an arsonist. Others, however, decided to act a little bit more rashly and started throwing rocks at the soldier. Because what son of Abraham doesn't love a good stone? Whether Communus had directly incited the mooning or he just sat back and watched as everything went down isn't really certain. But the powder keg had definitely been lit and he couldn't control the riot. So he called in reinforcements to chase the rioting Jews out of the temple. And so then the angry mob of Jews immediately started panicking and the riot morphed into a stampede as they were all trying to get away from the soldiers. Josephus then reported that 20 to 30,000 people died in a massive crush at the temple exit as the pilgrims were trying to flee the soldiers, which is certainly an exaggerated number, but regardless, man shows us thousands dead is quite a fucking headline. And not only did thousands of people die, but as far as we know, the soldier who picked them all off wasn't even disciplined for the mooning rituals. He wasn't disciplined at all for starting a series of events that led to thousands of deaths. He completely got away with it. I mean, he must have really cracked up his superiors. By the way, while we're on the subject of Rome, some of you nerds might like to know that the Third Punic War only ended 38 years ago. I mean, it came to a de facto end in 146 BC when the Romans finally vanquished their biggest rival and then spent the next century or so conquering the rest of the Mediterranean and that's the biggest victory lap. However, it turned out that the Romans were so busy Carthago delenda esting that they forgot to do all of the bureaucracy